There's definitely films that stick with you and linger with you emotionally, and David Lowery's A Ghost Story is definitely one of them.
When I was little, we used to move all the time. I would write these notes, and I would fold them up really small, and I would hide them.
What did they say?
They were just like things I wanted to remember, so that if I ever wanted to go back, there'd be a piece of me there waiting.
We build our legacy piece by piece, and maybe the whole world will remember you, or maybe just a couple of people, but you do what you can to make sure you're still around after you're gone.
This is not a film that people kind of ran out to go see. And I remember seeing the trailer for it. I was really interested in seeing this in the theater because this movie is so subtle and so quiet, where it was a big turnoff for a lot of people. It's a very polarizing film, but it is one that, if you have the right temperament and the right patience for it, is one of the most rewarding films I've ever seen. Another thing about seeing it when I did, which was somewhat recently, probably about a month ago, is that enough time has passed. If you did want to go see this film, you probably did. So I can talk a little bit more about spoilers. So this is kind of a warning for anyone that hasn't seen the film. Please, turn this video off and go watch this film. The film really only stars a few people, and Rooney Mara and Casey Affleck are a couple that live in Dallas, Texas. The only real clear thing is that Casey Affleck's character is a musician, and they live in kind of a quaint house in Texas, so probably not an extremely successful one financially, that is. The couple moves into this house where there's a piano, and it's this kind of nice little quaint Texas home. Rooney Mara's character kind of wants to leave, and Casey Affleck's kind of very adamant about not, but we get a little bit of hints of arguments. But to me, at least, the movie really starts settling in. At night, they're sleeping together, and they hear a loud noise on the piano, and they go out to investigate. And they go back in their room, and they're cuddling for bed. I guess this is a good opportunity to discuss the aspect ratio that this movie is filmed in, which is 4:3 vignetted, so it is very tight and compact. You feel like you're kind of part of every scene because it is so intimate. Right there, that scene where they're kind of laying down after they inspected whatever the noise was on the piano. It just a very long, lingering shot on a husband and wife kind of cuddling and getting comfortable in bed. That says more than any of the kind of dialogue, which is not even that much, before that scene between the two. And they are close, and they have this very close-knit connection. Actors act, they're trained to say exposition back and forth to each other, and great actors could come off more genuine in these things, conveying emotions to the audience while talking to another person reading lines. But if you've been in a relationship, if you've been in that kind of comfortable lived in marriage or just regular relationship, then it's those moments when you're lying in bed with your spouse, and you're just kind of holding each other, and you're just kind of moving around and getting close, and sharing a kiss or two. That's the kind of thing where it conveys it so much better, or at least in this scene, it conveys so much better their entire relationship than any of the exposition that a normal scene would have. And it is a very nice lingering shot that goes on for quite a bit. That's when I think a lot of audience members either were on board for this movie or kind of checked out. A lot of people will say not a lot happens in this movie. Nothing's going on. It's just a movie with a still camera in this tight aspect ratio of two people sitting in a room and not even saying anything, but just living and just being close. Where I totally understand, if you don't have the temperament for, then this movie's not for you. The next morning, Casey Affleck's character winds up dying in a fatal car accident right outside their home. The next scene after that is Rooney Mara just kind of identifying his body, and then again another kind of hospital lingering shot. And this is another one where, if you have unfortunately been in the hospital for an extended period of time, whether watching over a loved one or anything like that, the scene did a lot to convey that kind of background hustle and bustle, ambient noise of a hospital where you kind of hear things going on in the background. But on the other end, it's so kind of quiet and cold in these situations where in this scene you even hear like the air conditioning buzzing, and it's just, you know, a big lingering shot on Casey Affleck after they cover him back up, where I think a lot of other directors would cut away at that point. That's when he just kind of sits up after about, you know, a good 4 minutes of just a still image on him. After a scene like that, just seeing his dead body kind of sit up with the sheet over him still and then just start walking around a hospital seems pretty silly, but in the context of this movie and just the tone of the movie and everything and this all happens in the first around 10 minutes, it all just kind of makes sense, and it is so kind of solemn, and it's not really, this movie's really not about the performances because Casey Affleck's covered up for most of the time. Rooney Mara does do some incredible things with what she's given, but it's not really about the performance. It's about kind of the overall ambience. It's about that quietness when you're sitting in a room and you feel like you're not alone. It's when you experience great loss and you just need to go in a room and put headphones on and listen to music, sit in your living room and stare out the window. This film is about capturing emotions. It's not really about Oscar-winning performances. I have to mention the infamous pie eating scene. This movie has a lot of temperament checkpoints throughout the film, where shots like the one where they're in bed together, or shots like, 8 minutes of a kind of a close-up of Rooney Mara sitting there eating an entire pie and then vomiting afterwards, but with no dialogue, sitting on a kitchen floor. I'm sure at that point, after 4 minutes into watching a person in silence eat pie, a lot of people checked out. This movie is kind of about when something huge happens and then everyone goes home eventually. You lose a parent, you lose a loved one. The whole family rushes in and tries to be very helpful and tries to do everything for you, but then after a while those people leave and people have to go back to their own lives. This movie, it seems like it's the what comes after. It's the when you are alone again and sitting in your room alone with your thoughts or alone with a pie. That's the type of movie that this is. That's the thing that David Lowery really captures so well, is that mood. Does run a couple parallel themes all at once. Yes, it is about love and it is about loss, but it is very much about time, and it is about perceptions of time passing, where he is just sitting there watching his wife grieve over, sitting in a kitchen eating a pie, and that kind of draws out. It seems at first that she's kind of committed to staying there, but once she kind of brings other people home and it shows a little passage of time and she is starting to kind of move on, and the husband starts kind of, getting upset and flicking things off and making his presence more and more known in the house, realizes that it's kind of time to move on. But as the movie goes on, it almost is cut like a movie trailer where you just get a little bit more clips. You get clips of her coming in and out of the house, and you don't have those long lingering shots anymore. The editing is a little bit more fast paced. Really, the breaking point is when she is listening to the song that he finished, and then it shows a couple of scenes of her just listening to that and kind of dwelling and living in that emotion, and just kind of missing her husband. And then, at that point, she realizes that there's a turning point and it's time to move on in her life. She writes him a note, puts it in the wall, and then kind of moves on. And at that point, that's kind of the hardest part of acceptance, at least for me, is the point when you do have to kind of separate yourself from a situation and you do need to move on. You don't forget, but you need to kind of have a normal day. And the point where she does kind of leave that note in the wall, gets in her car, and it's this kind of shot of just her driving away. That's the scene that really got to me emotionally. You do get attached to physical places and physical people. She's closing that part of her life off, at least being in that physical space that she is, held these memories with her husband and now is kind of moving on. It just kind of rips your heart out a little bit, because he's still in the house. And at that point, as soon as Rooney Mara's character is kind of, for all intents and purposes, out of 90% of the rest of the movie, he's still there. And that's when it just seems like time definitely starts moving faster in his perspective as a character. He goes and he starts communicating across the way with another ghost that, doesn't, it seems like they're going through the same thing that he's going through, and they're waiting for someone to return, and they don't even, they've been there for so long or whatever, in their life has moved on that they don't even remember who they were or who they were waiting for. But spiritually, they're just so tethered to that space of familiarity that they can't move on. They need some kind of closure. The rest of the movie is just him watching this physical space being occupied by other people. You have a nice family move in and they're celebrating holidays and they're having dinner. But at that point, he kind of snaps out of it and just gets, I guess, just gets so frustrated with his situation and what's happened, and he gets very protective over that space and goes full on poltergeist, and he starts taking out glassware and throwing dishes out of the cabinet, and scares his family enough to want to leave. The next people that occupy this space are just kind of a bunch of college kids or something. You would probably assume that this place, stories kind of started getting out about it, and there was a haunting there or something. So you could see those kind of hipsters wanting to live in a place like this. They probably got a pretty good deal as well. You have the person philosophizing at the party about, time and everything. And it is a little off-putting, especially because this movie is so mute for so long. And then the first thing that you get, a guy on a soapbox, telling everybody that, your life and your legacy don't matter and everything's going to be erased. The more he speaks, and in the context of the film, I think you do need that kind of clean slate where, the rest of the movie can't just be a silent film, where you do need that break of the utter silence, and you do need someone kind of saying something and moving the narrative along. So at first, that was probably my least favorite part of the film, but now, watching the movie now a couple times, it is kind of a nice welcome break that you need to kind of move the plot along. The house becomes abandoned, and it's just really him sitting there trying to get this note out of the wall that his wife has left for him, and he is making some progress. But, as you could see with all the people moving in and out and how bad the house has fallen in disrepair, there's been probably, decades of time that's passed of him just living in this space and trying to get this note out of the wall. Right when he gets it, basically, they tear down the house. He sees his neighboring ghosts across the way. Finally comes to terms that no one's probably coming back, and then they just kind of drop and disappear right there and kind of move on in their existence, or maybe has a non-existence after that. That's kind of part of the heady themes that this film asks you to think about. But the next phase is him staying geographically in the same spot of where the house has been, but now there's been a giant skyscraper that's been constructed around, so he's just kind of moving in and out of board meetings and other things until he goes on the roof and just sees that this world is kind of completely moved on, that there's this giant kind of futuristic city that's built up around him and where his space has been, and realizes that he is outdated and he's kind of alien to this world now. And that's when he decides to kind of take the plunge. And little does he know, maybe, he goes back in time, because I guess when you're in this state, as far as in the context of the movies goes, that he still hasn't moved on. He still wants to know about this note, still not ready to take that next step. He still wants to exist. So instead of moving on like the other neighboring ghost has, he is plunged into the past. He kind of follows this family. It seems like, it's like a pioneer settlers family. It's in the same space where his house will eventually get erected. He sees the pioneer daughter write a little note and stick it under a rock. And then, the next scene is just them after they were murdered by Native Americans. And it's pretty brutal. And again, he just kind of doesn't want to get out of that space, whether it's not his anymore, whether it's a torn down house, skyscrapers around it, or now just sitting here and watching a young girl decay over probably 100+ years. He still doesn't want to move on and take the next step. At that point, it becomes a loop. He's watching himself while he's living, all the way up to the point where he's the one that makes the sound on the piano at the very beginning of the film when they go and inspect it. He watches himself die. He even watches himself in ghost form, all the way up to the point where his wife moves on again. That's when he's finally able to grab the note, read it, and then he kind of finally accepts whatever and is able to move on. I like the fact that we never get to see what's on that note. Can't stop thinking about it. Like I said in the beginning, it's just one of those films that really sticks with you emotionally. And especially if you're going through stuff, have experienced some kind of loss, I don't know whether it's good or bad. If you want to just move on, put on something brainless and just turn your mind off and watch it. But at least for me, it was borderline therapeutic to get lost in some of these lingering scenes where I was watching them at certain points. I almost forgot that I was watching a movie. It just really started opening myself up emotionally. I was able to really think about stuff that was going on in my life. This film acted as kind of a catalyst. So at least to me, it was a bit therapeutic. But, to each his own. I totally get it. If you don't want to watch someone eat a pie for 8 minutes, it doesn't mean that you're a dummy. It doesn't mean that I'm a hipster because I liked it. For some reason, this movie had a gigantic resounding effect on me, and I definitely recommend at least trying it out. Is it perfect? No, but it did change my life. It did change my life in a good way, and I would definitely go recommend watching it. Even though, like I said, it's not a perfect film, what it did for me, I can't mitigate it, so I would definitely recommend it to everyone. If you like this review and you want to see more stuff like this, then let me know in the comments. Also, if you want to follow me on social media, I'm on Twitter at OrzovDunn, on Facebook and Instagram at Jon Dunning.